He made him a cup of tea. That was the part that jumped out at me 2 weeks ago when the details emerged about the 11-hour hostage ordeal with Rabbi Charlie and 3 members of his congregation in Colleyville, Texas. I followed that story very closely the entire Sabbath, the entire Saturday, because it hit literally very close to home. My childhood friend, who you've heard me talk about through the years, Cindy, who we grew up together at the same church. We shared a call into ministry the same day in junior high. Our youth minister asked us to stay late and literally called us into the ministry together. We went to college together. We were roommates in seminary together. She's a pastor there, and her husband's the superintendent of the schools. And they've worked with Rabbi Charlie very closely for the last decade. They've both spoken in his synagogue. They've organized a big feeding project, and they're like, he is the best guy. And if you followed the story, you know that morning, it was an unusually cold morning in North Texas, and this man showed up who was very cold. And so the rabbi invited him in, and he made him a cup of tea. And he listened to his story, which really didn't make complete sense, but that's not that unusual. And then during the service, when the rabbi turned around to face Jerusalem to do the prayers, he heard what he thought was the click of a gun, and he turned around and he didn't see anything. And so then during the silent prayers, he came off the bema and he walked up to the man and he told him, you know, if you've just come here to be warm and to be in the service, you're welcome to stay. And then the man pulled out the gun. And as you know, over the next 10, 11 hours, the negotiations, the SWAT team arriving, at some time around 5 o'clock, one of the congregants who had diabetes and wasn't doing well was allowed to leave. And then as the night wore on, the negotiations became more stressed, the man became more agitated, and then he became calm. And he asked the rabbi for a cup of juice. And the rabbi went to the kitchen, came back with the juice, and the man had it in his hand. His gun wasn't quite close to him. So the rabbi told the other 2 to run. He threw the chair at the man, and they managed to escape. In the next few hours and days, more of the details would emerge, right? About the man and what his demands were and what his delusions were and how the SWAT team had arrived for Virginia. But the detail that stuck with me was he made the man a cup of tea. And it wasn't just that, it was the careful, considerate words that the rabbi used as he praised the Muslim community, praised the imam, talked about how they had been with him. And later in an interview with Mary Louise Kelly from NPR, the rabbi was asked, so the next time someone shows up at the door who's cold and wants to come in, what will you do? And the rabbi said, this one individual was just one individual. I've led thousands and thousands of services, and nothing like this has ever happened. He said, when people come to the door, they're anxious and they're nervous and they're questioning and they're wondering, will I be welcome? Will I be accepted? And he said, whether they're coming from our community or another Jewish community, or whether they're not Jewish and they're just curious and they've never been to a service, he said they want to know, am I going to belong? And I want them to know, you're going to belong here. He said, we can't lose who we are. Welcoming and hospitality is everything. Really? So the next time someone shows up, you're just going to welcome them in and just believe the best? That sounds like a really good way to end up with someone else with a gun in your synagogue. And yet that's exactly what Soren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher and theologian, said 175 years ago in his book Works of Love, which was this commentary on love in the New Testament. The first part of it is sort of, you know, just like you could recite it in Sunday school. You shall love, right? It's a commandment. And you shall love who? Your neighbor. And who's your neighbor? The next person you meet. And who? And you should love as yourself. And then the second half of the book, it gets really challenging. He's got a couple of chapters where he sort of riffs on this passage in 1 Corinthians 13, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And Kierkegaard expands it and it says, love believes all things and is never deceived. Love hopes all things and is never put to shame. What he means by that is love believes all things. Love believes the best. Love sees a person, and love believes kindness and justice and healing and honesty and goodness. Love believes love. Love presupposes love in every single person you meet. Walking down the street, in the store, passing, wherever. I love that. But it's not really how we normally roll, right? I mean, we meet somebody and what do? You know, we kind of hold back, we kind of size them up, we kind of want to check them out, we kind of want to see, is this somebody I can really trust, let my guard down with, be myself, but not love. I mean, that makes sense, right? Because we're finite creatures, we've only got so much, we got to be kind of careful with ourselves, but this love, this agape love, this love, it comes from this eternal spring of God. And this love can never run dry. It's just this infinite source of love. And it's in me, and it's in you, and it's in every single person we meet. And so when we meet a person, we presuppose love because we know this image of God love is planted in their heart. We don't bring it there, it's there. It makes me think of little Archbishop Tutu, you know, the South African bishop we just lost. As a black African, he was completely oppressed most of his life, unable to vote, unable to live and walk and work and be most places. And he said in his little high-pitched voice, every time I meet a person, white or black, I feel like genuflecting, like bowing, because the image of God, because Christ is in them. I just love that. I love that. Believing in every single person, there is the image of God. There is Christ present. And then I think about Steve Bannon. And then I think about Alex Jones, who said that Sandy Hook didn't happen and those kids were just actors. And I think about how they tormented those parents. I think about the spewers of hate. I think about those people on the far right. I think about the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and the people who stir up insurrection. And then I think about the history of this country. I think about the slave trade. I think about lynching. I think about the concentration camp. Somebody designed those, figured out how to get the gas in there. And then I think, how can you possibly meet people and just believe the best? Kierkegaard had an answer to that. He said the answer is that so much of every person is hidden. We're hidden so much. I mean, haven't you had those feelings all the time where you feel envious or afraid or insecure and you think, why is that coming up for me? What? And you just, it doesn't matter how much therapy, you just can't figure it out. And you think about all the people you love. You think about your parents, your children, your very dearest friends. How much of them you really don't know. So much of them is hidden, right? That you just can't even begin. So how much more so for the person we don't want to get to know, right? So Kierkegaard would say even the most despicable person, even the most evil person, it's just possible that every single thing hidden in them is good and pure and full of love. Think about Robert J. Lifton, that scholar who wrote that book, Nazi Doctors. And those doctors talk about the personification of evil. They had families they loved. Many of them had practices where they cared for the poor. Some of them had practices where they had a lot of Jewish patients, right? How could that be? Is it possible that so much of what is hidden is really good? Kierkegaard would say as far as mistrust can believe evil in another person, can believe there's nothing redeeming in that person, can believe there's nothing worth saving, love can believe there is so much good there, there's so much positivity. Hope can believe that. You can just imagine in that person all this love just waiting to come out. I still think that's really far-fetched. And I think there's a reason, right, why we're biologically wired to imagine lions and tigers and bears. You know, we're more sensitive to pain than pleasure, right? Because that kind of being wary and cautious and not sure, it's what's kept us alive. But there's a cost to that, isn't it? In our society now, where every algorithm is designed to make you click on the scary story, you see the damage in that, especially when you look at what it does to yourself. In January, I took this 12-hour course online with a professor, Kristen Neff from University of Texas, who I love, this psychology professor, our own Elizabeth Wilson had kind of turned me on to. And it was all about compassion, self-compassion, all about the research of compassion and how it actually helps you take more responsibility and it helps you be a better person. And some of it was really familiar to anybody who's done yoga and meditation and all that. I mean, it kind of, the basis of compassion, right? Kind of being mindful. Life is really hard, right? It is really hard right now. People can't see my mom can hardly see her sisters, right? People are isolated. It's tough. But it's tough for everybody. The second thing, right? Life is about suffering. Everybody suffers. People on the other side of the ocean literally clinging to a raft, right? And then the third thing, you know, you can't fix it all, but you'll try to do what you can, right? You'll try to do what you can to bring caring and love to yourself and to the next person you meet. And then there were exercises, you know, there were exercises in self-compassion. The one that jumped out to me was make yourself a cup of tea, right? And go for a walk. Stop during the day and have an apple. Do your gratitude practice. Think again today about all that's not wrong. And then there was that simple practice about giving yourself a blessing. Like, what do you need to hear from yourself? You know, may I be whole. May I be safe. May I be happy. May I be free from suffering. May I be a light to the world. And then there would be times when there were like 220 people in this Zoom, and most of them were therapists or counselors, or they were in health ed, and then there would be time when people could share. And I was shocked. And as people were young and attractive and, you know, primarily middle class and more, how hard people were on themselves. At the end, this young woman, just beautiful, she said, I just have to be honest. I can't imagine saying anything kind to myself. I just can't imagine doing any of that. You know, I mean, there's probably an evolutionary basis to that too, right? Think back to the caveman days. There's only so much food and there's so many kids, and you want to be the kid who gets fed, right? Be a really good kid. Beat yourself. Be the self-critic, right? You know, before dad can hit you, you're already on yourself. But look at the damage it does. Oh my God, we have got such a damaged planet full of damaged people, damaging one another, right? Because of all this beating ourselves up and beating everybody else up. Love says there's another way. It's not just a feeling. Love knows, right? Love knows history. Love knows that there's a prison in Syria right now with like 900 little boys, right? Love knows that. Love knows experience. Love knows the heartache. And love still says, I'm gonna love. It's a commitment. It's a practice. It's a discipline. It's a lifelong attachment. A decision to believe the best. A decision to believe the good in the person right in front of you. Ask the monks at Conception Abbey in Northwest Missouri about that. That's what they've been doing their whole life, right? Greeting the stranger, welcoming the next person who comes right in front of them, believing the best. It's the center part of their gift. And this June will be the 20th anniversary since a disgruntled 71-year-old man from Kearney, Missouri, who had no connection to the Abbey, went in there and shot 4 of the monks before he killed himself. One of the monks who died was 60, and one of the monks who died was the 85-year-old porter. The job of the porter at a Benedictine monastery is to greet the stranger. Your bed's the closest, it's right there. You welcome the person as Christ. And the beautiful rule of Saint Benedict explains how the porter should behave. Whenever a person approaches or a poor person hails you, call out, a blessing, thanks be to God. And whenever you're greeting any stranger, whether they're arriving or leaving, always show humility, bow your head, prostrate your body, as if you're meeting the adoration of Christ in front of you. After the massacre, the monks were asked how they would change their practices, and they said, for 15 centuries, we have been greeting the person who comes as the face of Christ. Nothing will change. And so the next morning they got up and they began to clean and to sweep and to prepare to welcome the next person who arrives as Christ. The 85-year-old porter who was there, who died, was a soft, gentle soul. He was a man of deep prayer. He was the man all the other monks sought out for spiritual guidance. He'd been there since World War II, since 1943. 60 years he'd been at the door, greeting the next person, believing the best, seeing them as Christ. And in the end, who would ever say that he had been deceived? Would he have been better spending that 85 years cautious and wary and mistrustful? So that at the very end he could say, see, I was right all along. No. Ask Rabbi Charlie and ask those monks, and they'll tell you, love hopes all things, love believes all things. And in the end, what does that get you? But a life filled with love. Amen.
Amen.